Something unprecedented is happening right now, and it has nothing to do with what's happening on the pitch. Thousands of football fans around the world, people who have waited years, some even decades for this moment, are walking away. Not because their team failed to qualify, not because of injury news or a scheduling conflict. They are walking away from the 2026 FIFA World Cup deliberately, consciously, and with a sense of deep betrayal. And the story behind why they're doing it is far more complicated and far more important than most people realize. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why one of the most anticipated sporting events in human history is facing a crisis unlike anything the World Cup has ever seen before. And what FIFA did in response, well, that only made certain fans angrier. Let's begin at the very beginning. When FIFA announced that the 2026 World Cup would be hosted across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, the reaction was electric. 48 nations competing for the first time, 16 new teams on the world stage, matches spread across 12 iconic cities, a tournament described as the largest in the history of the beautiful game. Fans from Sao Paulo to Seoul, from Lagos to London circled their calendars and started making plans. This was supposed to be football's greatest celebration. But behind the excitement, something was already going wrong, and the people who felt it first were the ones who loved the game the most. It started with the tickets. For the very first time in World Cup history, FIFA introduced something called dynamic pricing. You may recognize it from airline seats or concert tickets. The more people want something, the higher the price climbs in real time. And what FIFA discovered, or perhaps already knew, was that hundreds of millions of people around the world desperately want a seat at the World Cup. So the prices climbed, and then they climbed again, and they kept on climbing. The numbers that emerged stunned even seasoned football observers. A single seat at the World Cup final was initially sold for $6,700, already shocking, more than 4 times the price of a comparable seat at the previous World Cup in Qatar just 4 years ago. But then came the next pricing window, and the same ticket was now listed at nearly $11,000, almost double what it had been just months before. And then FIFA introduced something they called front category seats, premium positions at the very front of the stands. After fees, some of those seats were listed at more than $30,000. $30,000 for a single football match. To put that in perspective, that figure exceeds the annual income of many working families across Europe, South America, and Africa. These are not the casual observers. These are the devoted supporters, the ones who paint their faces, who travel thousands of miles, who pass their love of football down from generation to generation. And FIFA had priced them out entirely. The backlash was fierce. Football supporters organizations across Europe gathered together and did something rarely seen in football. They took FIFA to court. Football Supporters Europe and the consumer group Euroconsumers filed a formal complaint with the European Commission, accusing FIFA of abusing its monopoly position to impose prices that would never exist in a competitive marketplace. Their words were not diplomatic. One prominent fan group called what FIFA had done a monumental betrayal, a betrayal of the tradition of the World Cup itself. The executive director of Football Supporters Europe said plainly, "This is a handful of people trying to extract as much money as possible from the tournament, and the very nature of the competition is now at risk." A supporter who wished to follow their national team from the opening group stage all the way to the final through official channels would need to spend nearly $7,000 in tickets alone. That is almost 5 times the equivalent cost at the Qatar World Cup just 4 years ago.
But that was only the beginning of the crisis, because while the pricing scandal was erupting publicly, another story was quietly unfolding behind the scenes, one that would ultimately convince far more fans to stay home. Imagine spending months saving money, applying for a visa, booking flights, and arranging time away from work, all to attend a football tournament, a dream you've carried for years. And then imagine being told, quietly and without ceremony, that you may simply not be allowed in. For millions of international fans, that nightmare became very real. Visa wait times for visitors from countries like India and Colombia stretched to between 400 and 700 days. Not weeks, not months, days, stretching well beyond a year, for a tournament beginning in June 2026. The mathematics were brutal. By the time a visa interview could be arranged, the World Cup would already be over. The United States State Department had frozen visa processing for citizens of 75 countries as part of a broader immigration review. While exemptions were eventually created for players, coaches, and official team personnel, the fate of ordinary fans, the lifeblood of any tournament atmosphere, remained deeply uncertain. New security measures added further layers of anxiety. Reports emerged that visitors arriving in the United States could be asked to surrender social media passwords and provide biometric data at the border. For fans from politically sensitive nations, this was not an inconvenience, it was a genuine deterrent. One German football supporter, a man who had attended every single World Cup since 2006, who had traveled to South Africa and Brazil, countries many considered risky, announced he would not be making the journey to America. He owned tickets worth $1,600. He had already paid, and still he chose to stay away. His reasoning was simple and quietly devastating. He said he had always felt safe at previous World Cups because of the visible presence of security, but this time it was not the lack of security that concerned him, it was the security itself. And he was far from alone. An organized supporters group representing LGBTQ fans of England's national team, Three Lions Pride, announced they would not be traveling to the United States as a group. Their statement cited serious concerns about safety, discrimination, and the protection of human rights on American soil. A Canadian fan named Omar Hassan had originally planned to travel with his cousin, a supporter from Tanzania, to matches in Boston and New York. When he discovered that Tanzania was among the countries subject to restricted entry, those plans collapsed. He resold his tickets. The dream was over. For the travel industry, the alarm bells were already ringing. Reports indicated that international tourism spending to the United States had dropped measurably even before the World Cup began. One estimate put the loss at nearly $6 billion compared to the previous year, a decline attributed in significant part to uncertainty around entry procedures and the broader political climate. The executive director of Football Supporters Europe, Ronan Ivan, described the situation with rare candor. He said there were people who simply could not afford the tickets, and then there were others who, for ethical reasons, simply did not want to travel to the United States at this particular moment in history. A perfect storm, that was the phrase he used. Ticket prices, political atmosphere, immigration uncertainty, the near impossibility of entry for fans from dozens of nations, all of it arriving at the same time, directed at the same tournament. And now, here is where the story takes another unexpected turn. Because while fans overseas were choosing to stay home, fans inside the United States were confronting a different kind of frustration, one that had nothing to do with visas or borders, and everything to do with feeling cheated. Reports began to surface that fans who had purchased tickets in premium sections of stadiums, paying premium prices in good faith, were receiving tickets to entirely different seats on delivery. Seats farther from the field, seats tucked behind the goals, seats that bore no resemblance to what they had been shown and what they had paid for. FIFA had changed the stadium zone maps after tickets had already been sold. New zones had been quietly created, seating categories had been reshuffled, and fans who had paid thousands of dollars discovered too late that what they had purchased was not what they would receive.
The outcry reached the offices of state government. The attorneys general of New York and New Jersey, the two states hosting the World Cup final at MetLife Stadium, issued a formal subpoena to FIFA. They launched a joint investigation into FIFA's ticketing practices, citing concerns about misleading seat information and the dramatic, unexplained escalation in prices. Between October 2025 and April 2026, FIFA had raised the price of tickets for more than 90 of the tournament's 104 matches. The average increase across the three main ticket categories was 34% in less than 6 months, with the tournament approaching and fans already committed. New York's Attorney General said publicly that fans deserved a fair shot at affordable tickets and should be able to trust that the seats they purchased would be the seats they received. The investigation would examine whether FIFA had violated consumer protection law, whether the organization had misled fans, artificially inflated prices, and used its monopoly status to impose conditions that would never be acceptable in any competitive market. California's Attorney General also sent a formal letter to FIFA raising similar concerns. Several Democratic members of Congress wrote to FIFA demanding answers. The conversation had moved far beyond football. It had entered the legal system. And even the President of the United States, Donald Trump, a man whose administration had championed this tournament, remarked publicly that he would not spend $1,000 on nosebleed seats for the opening match. The president himself distancing himself from the pricing strategy of the very tournament his country was hosting. FIFA's response? Their president, Gianni Infantino, explained that the organization was simply adapting to the North American market. Dynamic pricing, he said, was standard practice for major sporting events in the United States. The World Cup, he added, was on course to generate more than $11 billion, including broadcast deals, making it the most commercially successful tournament in history. $11 billion. And yet, outside the stadiums, the atmosphere was unlike anything the World Cup had ever produced before.